Aadhar, India's biometric ID project, is in the midst of some controversy after the government asked it to be linked to the PAN card, which is really issued by the Income Tax Department. Earlier, there was a controversy because it was linked to the midday meal scheme, whereas children had to produce an Aadhar in order to avail of the midday meal scheme. This, of course, raises some larger issues and perhaps concerns on the Aadhar project in itself and whether it's being mandatorily and against people's wishes being linked to a whole bunch of services and benefits. So let's talk about that a little bit, and also let's talk about what lies ahead in future and how can everyone feel more comfortable if they have to, including, of course, with the right legal cover. To discuss this, I'm joined by Pranesh Prakash of the Center for Internet Society from Bangalore. Also with me here is Praveen Chakravarty, investment banker, and also from IDFC Institute, and someone who's worked on Aadhar in the beginning. And Praveen, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but let's try and understand two or three things in sequence. So first, of course, is to find out why are these concerns there today for a project that's obviously been in gathering steam, so to speak, for many years. The second thing is that what is the difference between voluntary and mandatory, and why is one of greater concern than the other, considering that there are some benefits which are linked to it. The third is we should perhaps try and understand, is Aadhaar technically sound or not? Does the concept of deduplication work? This is something that's been discussed in the past, but it's worth revisiting for a quick moment. And finally, of course, if this project has to move forward in whatever way, what's the right legal cover, sanction, and citizen sort of involvement it should have? So, Praveen, let me begin with you first of all. So, why are the concerns there today? From your perspective, I'm going to put the same question to Pranesh.
See, the concern, the way I looked at it is, the concern seems to be a perceived coercion. And this notion of is Aadhaar voluntary or mandatory. On March 30th, 2015, I wrote a piece in the Indian Express. And I kind of used the Election Commission voting card as a parallel. Now, is voting ID mandatory or voluntary for voting? And voting is perhaps the most fundamental right of any citizen. The answer is it's unambiguous. And I joke saying, is it mandatorily voluntary or voluntarily mandatory? So the way Aadhaar was structured from the beginning, it was supposed to be a multi-purpose identity program. It wasn't a functional program. So it could never have been compulsory for anything because it wasn't a program specific identity. So in that sense, it is only right that it was voluntary. Now, if specific programs such as the Election Commission or the RTO says you must have this to be able to either drive a car or to vote, that is a program specific requirement for which each program is free to use Aadhaar as a form of identity in whatever form and manner that they choose to.
Right. Or not, it may also be free not to use it if it feels that it
Absolutely.
can achieve whatever objective.
And hence it's not mandatory in the technical sense of the term.
Right. Okay. So Pranesh, do you want to weigh in on this? How do you come in on what we've talked about so far?
Just on that point, I think it's absolutely correct because from the UIDAI perspective, Aadhaar is not mandatory. It's individual government departments and programs that choose to make Aadhaar mandatory. But look upon it from the perspective of the citizen, rather than looking at it from the perspective of the government, right? Rather than looking at it from the perspective of UIDAI. A citizen, while signing up for Aadhaar, is given a form that right at the top says it's voluntary, but no, as a person who earns more than 2.5 lakh rupees a year, I have to file, an income tax return. And in order to do so, I must now, as per the new finance bill, have an Aadhaar number. So, from my perspective, it's not actually voluntary. It's only voluntary from the perspective of UIDAI. And I think that's often a trap that we fall into, lots of things that UIDAI claims are absolutely correct, but from their own perspective, not from the perspective of the citizen.
Right. So Pranesh, the question to that could be that, so why not direct one's concerns at, let's say, in the last case, the Ministry of Finance, who in turn runs the Central Board of Direct Taxes, who in turn issues permanent account numbers or PAN cards?
Absolutely, you're right. That is where, in a well-functioning democracy, where different departments run under their heads, one would logically go with one something. But we know that for Aadhaar, there is push from the Prime Minister's office at the central government level for including Aadhaar everywhere. Since January 2017, January 1st, we've seen more than 60 notifications in the Gazette from different departments relating to Aadhaar and making Aadhaar compulsory for something or the other. Now, I don't think, and given that, even when opposition parties in parliament, not just me as an ordinary citizen, when parliamentarians with all their powers, when they sought to make amendments to Aadhaar in the Rajya Sabha, none of those amendments were even heard. All of them were shot down by voice vote. So when even some of the most powerful people in the country are unable to get through to a single government department, what possibility do I have as an ordinary citizen?
Right.
See, I just want to come in. I think we should be sure, we should be careful not to conflate various issues. See, I think there is a feeling of mistrust about Aadhaar, primarily because of the process in which the bill was introduced and made into law. I think what Pranesh is talking about when Rajya Sabha's amendments were not taken, it was primarily because it was introduced as a money bill, right? So I think the process of introduction of Aadhaar as into law, legislating Aadhaar into law, yes, I think, and I completely agree that this is by no stretch of imagination is Aadhaar a money bill. It should have gone through the due process. It was subversion of the process. It was backdoor entry. Okay. But let's not conflate that with Aadhaar, the program, the merits of it, and the concerns that we may have otherwise. So what I don't understand is what is the concern if you need Aadhaar for income tax filing.
Right. Okay, Pranesh, so let me come back to you on that. So what's the real concern here? I mean, I know that maybe on social media, in some media, we see some extreme concerns being voiced. Are you in that camp, or are you somewhere in between?
So I don't think there really is a concern if Aadhaar were just like any other identification, then there wouldn't be a concern. It would be just a smaller issue. There would be some concern, for instance, when you shift from one system to another, the kinds of hardships that you face. There are those kinds of ordinary concerns, but not the kind of concern that we're seeing today. The kind of concern that we're seeing today, I really believe is because of Aadhaar itself, not just because it's a new ID. And why is that? Because there are multiple layers of problems with Aadhaar. The fact that it is biometric based itself is a problem in terms of security, which I can speak at length about. The fact that the technology behind Aadhaar, of around 84 billion people, and base station technology, there was a field study that was done by UIDAI, data at the Center for Internet and Society. My colleague Hans Bertie's Matthews did calculations to show that when you are doing deduplication for the, say, 1.1 billion person, right, at that time, there'll be one false positive out of every 122 enrollments. That's way too high a number for us to be comfortable with. And these people are people who will be rejected, right, because of the false positive, or there'll be an additional very difficult process of human intervention, of manual sorting out to see whether it's a false positive, which there is no stopping for. So and Aadhaar has not put out any, UIDA has not put out any data about what are called the false positive identification rate, the false negative identification rate.
Pranesh, can I ask you a conceptual question?
What I'm saying is, so just to wrap up that thought, there are problems at the security level, there are problems in terms of the functioning of the technology, the fact that it can't deduplicate properly. There's also the concern, which I think is what you want me to come to, about privacy. Now, the problem there, I don't know if you've seen...
Pranesh, just hold your thought there for a second. Let me get Praveen in for the first part, which is the deduplication and the biometrics, and then we'll come back to the privacy, because that's a slightly larger issue. Praveen?
Yeah, so see, first let me start by saying I agree in a truly liberal society, even one innocent person cannot be convicted if that means letting 10 guilty go scot-free. So to that extent, a false positive is not acceptable in a truly liberal society. But having said that, let's acknowledge that there may be some false positives. Is there a recourse for that person who's impacted by that false positive? If there is no recourse, then I take all the points. But if there is recourse to that, if let's say, for example, someone is denied a certain benefit and it is entirely due to a technological problem, there is recourse to that for that person to go claim that, avail that benefit, and that exists today. So why are we trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater because of these concerns? And not for a moment am I belittling any of those concerns.
Right. Okay. No. So Pranesh, why? I mean, this is a question from someone who's watching this as well right now. So biometrics is perhaps the best known form of deduplication. Is there an alternative to this, the way you know it? I mean, when we say biometrics in the case of Aadhaar, we're talking not just about fingerprints, but also retina scans.
Not a retina, we use iris in Aadhaar. Now, that's a fantastic question. No, what Aadhaar, what UIDAI has come up with is the best known form of deduplication. My point is, it's still not good enough. Something at this scale has never been tried, which is why UID actually carried out the field study, and except it didn't analyze the results of the field study correctly, as our interventions have shown and our research has shown. So no, there isn't anything better, but that also raises the question of, do we need this kind of deduplication at all? As an example, one of the most famous instances of Aadhaar cutting down on subsidy fraud is that of the LPG subsidy scheme in Karnataka, where there was a claim that Aadhaar was responsible for around 120.9 crores rupees of fraud being detected and being fakes being removed. But if you actually look at the actual data, most of the deduplication happened before Aadhaar was actually introduced into the scheme. It was list-based deduplication that weeded out more than 20 times as many fake entries as Aadhaar enrollment did.
Right.
So the question isn't, is there better technology? The question is this technology even necessary in order to meet the kinds of aims that Aadhaar was built for?
Right. Pranesh, hold your thought there. So, fundamental question, do we need an Aadhaar at all? And why did we even embark on this project?
No. See, that's a very kind of counterfactual question. First of all, we don't know. Let's admit, we don't know how much we can save because of deduplication, ghosts and duplicate. Second, each of these were annual losses. Aadhaar is a capital expense. It's a one-time expense. These losses savings that we incur were annual losses that we were incurring. So it's a wrong comparison to begin with, right? So there is no, I think we first have to ask the question, even if let's say we saved whatever 5% or 2% of all the subsidy spend as were saved. Now, is that worth the cost? And what are the costs? The costs are financial costs, and then there are other concerns. And I keep hearing that it's technologically not foolproof. Yes, one missed call is not a case against all cell phones. So one drop call, I mean. So let's ask the question: is a person truly deprived of a particular benefit or any other service of the government without Aadhaar? And if she is deprived, then I agree that it is not worth it.
So let me ask the flip question, right? So what does the person really get by virtue of having an Aadhaar? Is the person, citizen, resident, progressively assured of better services or better benefits actually reaching to her or him?
Presumably, that's the entire premise behind. First, with the Aadhaar or no Aadhaar, we are already moving into what's called a direct benefits transfer, right? Where people are getting money in the bank accounts, right? So that 1.6 lakh crores of subsidy spend has already been put. People clearly prefer that. That's why the government's doing it. And is it more efficient? Presumably so. Aadhaar is only going to improve that. So where is the question of the citizen not wanting it?
Right. Okay. So before we come to the future, and we're also running out of time both, Pranesh, so the extreme viewpoint, of course, is that somehow this will all be a police state. All these databases will be monitored together, and you are under a lens from today onwards, and the future is very, very bleak. So why? I mean, do you see a technology, foundation to that argument, and do you really see that? I mean, is that something that's really practical or feasible?
Yes, there are at least three aspects to that argument. One is from the legal basis. If you look at Section 32 of the Aadhaar Act, it is exceedingly confusing, and the regulations actually make it far worse, because Section 32 on the one hand says that the purpose for which you're collecting any, you're engaging in any transaction cannot be logged by AI. But at the same time, there's a requirement on.
Right. Okay, Pranesh, I think we've lost you for a second. Let me come back in a moment. So, Praveen, do you want to answer the same question?
So, will we become a police state? Yeah. Now, I don't know.
Theoretically, I mean, to be fair, at least theoretically, we should address that. Whether we believe it will happen.
No, I agree. See, does Aadhaar give more information in the hands of the government? The answer is yes. Yeah. Now, could the government have gotten this information had they wanted to turn this into a police state? Otherwise, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the benefits that Aadhaar can accrue, both in terms of service delivery and welfare efficiency, versus the prospect of turning into a police state, assuming otherwise we would not have been able to, is false. Is a false binary in my view. We would if the notion of turning into a police state, I don't think is dependent on Aadhaar being there or not. Yes, it does give more information, but if we did want to turn into a police state, we could have anyway turned into one.
Right. Okay, so there's one more question. I don't know when we get Pranesh back and we can hear him clearly. So why isn't each department collecting? Yeah. So why isn't each department collecting details of its own? So for instance, when you go to the passport office, they do their own biometric collection. Why can't the income tax also do its own biometric collection? So that's a question that's just coming in on Facebook.
Sure, I think it's a policy decision. I mean, clearly we can argue that efficiency-wise, each department collecting its own. I'm pretty sure if we embarked down that road, the same people would have said, "Why are you collecting biometrics for every single thing? Why can't you just collect it centrally?"
Yeah.
So I think it can cut both ways.
Okay, Pranesh, we've like I said, almost run out of time. Last question. So if you were to look ahead, how do you see this project evolving? What is the kind of legal, technical, or other cover that you would like to see to make it safe and utilitarian for citizens and residents?
I think three things clearly need to be looked at. One, right now, consent can only be given. Consent can never be revoked when it comes to Aadhaar, even under the Aadhaar Act. That's a problem. Two, there is no general data protection or privacy law in India. So one of the largest problems with Aadhaar is not the existence of UID and Aadhaar itself, but the fact that it allows all these disparate databases, which earlier were silos, to be connected using Aadhaar, using biometric guarantees. That's a huge problem, and without having passed a privacy law, we should not have passed Aadhaar Act. Three, the existence of a central biometric database itself is a grave security threat. In the US, 21.5 million federal employees' data were lost recently, including 5 million fingerprints. If that happens in Aadhaar in India, then for those 5 million people, Aadhaar would no longer be usable. So we can't have that kind of a situation. We must get rid, in the long term, of the CIDR, which is the central database of all biometrics, and move it, even if we want to use biometrics, move it and use a decentralized system of biometrics stored on smart cards, so that there is authentication happening between what you have in terms of your fingerprint and the smart card. So three.
I agree on that, Govind. So that's really what's coming down to. It's just, I completely agree. We should we have made Aadhaar into law without having a right to privacy? No. So I think it's coming down to, we didn't have a right to privacy act, a privacy bill, and the way Aadhaar was turned into law as a money bill. I think those are the core concerns in my view, not so much Aadhaar as a program in itself.
Right. Okay. So we've run out of time. Thank you both for joining us. Thank you, Pranesh, for joining us from Bangalore. Thank you, Praveen, for joining us in the studio. We'll catch you next week, same time on Data Fix of IndiaSpend. Thanks so much for watching.